On we go with main gear assembly. That's where we're going to assemble the very nice and sturdy one-way gear onto the one-way bearing onto the main gear, and also mount up the one-way bearing shaft into the bevel gear for the torque tube drive takeoff. Out of bag 10 we've got 2 sets of 8 M3 taper bolts. Now some of these are 6mm and the other half are 8mm. The 8mm ones, the longer ones, go into the crown gear with the hub, and the shorter ones go into the main gear and the one-way bearing. That's shown clearly in the manual, so get it the right way round, and also don't lose the one-way key or Woodruff key that we're going to need for the one-way bearing. The one-way bearing's already mounted into its case, so nothing to do there. Simply a matter of fitting that onto the top of the main gear, which is 99 tooth, if anybody's interested, and then you can check it's the right way round because you've got tapers for the machine bolts on the bottom. So we're just putting those 8 M3x6 bolts there now, Loctited in, of course. And as usual, when you've got any of these multi-bolt fastenings, do them up and tighten them in a star type assembly to bed it down evenly and not distort the plate. Now the manual shows the one-way bearing shaft separate from the crown gear hub with a washer in between, but I'm pleased to say this is ready assembled for us by Kasama, and it's obviously a fairly tight interference fit, so it might be a replacement or a service feature in the future, but for now we can just go and fix that onto our crown gear hub in a similar way that we did with the main gear hub. So we'll do that now. To assemble the two together, you put the one-way key, eponymously known as a Woodruff key of course, into the slot in the crown gear hub. Make sure it's fully home. It wasn't a tight fit, but make sure it's parallel as well, because this is quite a tight fit. You can put the main gear on upside down just to check the keying of that, which looks like it's okay, but you can see it's going to be a pretty tight fit down there. And then when you're satisfied that that's properly bedded in, you can then assemble it properly by slipping down. You can see the orientation there, slipping down the main gear over the crown gear, getting your cutout lined up with your one-way key, and then just wiggle it down. If you get it off square, it's not going to go down, so you just got to wiggle it down square like that, and it goes down. And very, very little tolerance on that indeed, no slop in that, in typical Kasama fashion. And does it work as a one-way? You bet your life it does. Very, very nice sprag bearing in there and roller system. We can have a dry run getting the mast and main gear together so we can see how it goes prior to installation in the frame. The mast is a pretty snug fit down into the one-way, but you've got to line up the 2 holes down there, get an M3 driver, and give it a bit of a jiggle in there just to make sure that it's well lined up. Then out of bag 11 we have our mast lock, which is this collar. It's got a recess cut in the bottom, and it's got a little arrow on there saying lock going clockwise. We'll show you what that's for in just a sec. But we need to line up the holes for that. There's a big hole for the pin to go in. There's a small hole at the other side for us to push it out subsequently. Once we've got that all lined up, we can put our mast locking pin down in there. It goes all the way down. Push it in all the way, and then you can rotate that round just so that the hole is blanked off and there's no chance of that pin slipping out. And then when it's installed for good, we'll use our M2.5 by 15mm bolt to lock the collar. So that goes together okay. We see how that works there now. So we can, in the actual frame of the head, we'll use the small pin on the other side of the lock collar to push the pin out, but here we can just pull it off, push the pin out, and then we can put it into the frame. Before you assemble your main gear, make sure that the bolts on this bevel gear block are loose so that can be pushed all the way down. The gear will only fit in from the left hand side because the cutout in the left carbon frame is bigger than on the right. Don't forget to put your locking collar on the mast first of all, and save yourself a bit of time by lining up the holes down there. You can then slide it in from the left hand side, and you can just spin the fan round, which will move the pinion, and that can help you locate the assembly in there. And then you can drop your mast down from the top through the locking collar, through the main gear assembly, and line up the hole there prior to putting the pin in. It's a little bit of a fiddle getting this down, so get the main hole in the mast lined up. You can just see it appearing there, just above the locking collar. And then you can come on down. Once you get a bit of an eyeball for it, you can then use a suitable driver to pop in there and make sure it's all lined up. Then an M3 driver. Once that's all lined up, you can pop your pin in, which we'll do now. Pin goes in, push it down, move our collar quarter turn to lock it in, and then we can pop our M2.5 bolt down into the locking collar and pinch it tight. You can stop the locking collar from sliding around by putting a little driver into the hole. Keep that twisted round anti-clockwise, and then it won't slide around while you're securing the pinch collar, and obviously a bit of blue Loctite on the pinch collar. Now we've got to adjust the float in the main gear and the bevel gear. You can see there's quite a lot of movement in that main shaft gear. First thing we need to do is to, with our bevel gear adjustment screw just down here, we need to turn that fully clockwise, so we raise the bevel gear up into its highest position and then pinch these lock nuts close to lock the bevel gear in position for now. And you can see in its fully clockwise position the little cutout in the adjuster is pointing down around about 4 o'clock. Previously we've fixed our lowest bearing block at its lowest position in these oval holes, and we previously fixed our upper bearing block in its uppermost position. So now we need to do is make sure that the main gear is bedded down on the bevel gear, so there's no end float down there, and then bring this upper bearing block down to sit snugly on there, and then do up these pinch bolts, and that'll mean there that there's no up and down play of the main gear, and that it's fully bedded in onto the bevel gear. And then finally, just to get rid of any slight end floats there between the middle and the lower bearing blocks, loosen off the bearing block, get someone to pull the main gear up, and then just pull the lower bearing block up as far as it'll go and retighten the bolts. And thanks to Kasama for pointing that out to me. Once we've got this main gear secured with these bearing blocks, we can then go off and do final adjustment of the bevel gear. Now we can do a near final adjustment of our bevel gear backlash now, but I don't think we'll be able to do that finally until we've adjusted the other the other pinions, the clutch block, and also the pinion mating. To be able to turn the pinion around, we have to put our arrow shaft, our camouflaged arrow shaft, torque tube down, pop that in, and then we can move round our bevel gear. And for those of you that like to look, there's our camouflage TT with our drive coupler going into our coupling, going into our bevel gear, and the bevel gear spinning round. So I think a beauty for those who appreciate such things. And then there's various ways you can do to set this end float adjustment. You want between about 0.3 and 0.5 of a millimetre backlash, so basically just barely discernible, and it needs to run round smoothly, as you can see down there, and that's about the level which I think's right. We could eliminate all backlash by screwing it down a little bit more, and then you're going to get increased pressure on the bearings, and you're going to get uneven bearing wear. So that's done up just a little bit too tight. You can hear that it's noisy now, so if we back off that little bit, it'll run smoothly like it did before. So I think probably just mate it up until it's gently touching, a little bit of backlash, make sure it runs around smoothly, and then secure your pinch bolts like that. Another way Kasama says is listen to it. If you hear it running smoothly round and not noisy, then it's probably meshed in just nicely. But I think that's about right that you can see down there, so that's what I'm going to settle for. Okay, clutch block bearing installation next.